Okay. We are thrilled to have a moderator here moderating for us for the first time. He is the film critic for The Hollywood Reporter. Please welcome Justin Lowe.
Thanks for the questions, folks, and for coming out for tonight's screening. And we want to get right to it. And so I'm going to ask writer-director Chris Eska and the cast of the Retrieval to come on out. So, Chris, I'd like to start out with you. I think everybody noticed in the film the remarkable script. And in addition to that, clearly the casting is one of the principal elements that really makes the film work. And apparently you have a fairly rigorous rehearsal process prior to shooting. What is your perspective on preparing for the actual production phase of the project?
I do rehearse extensively. And I do have to be careful to make sure that I don't over-rehearse certain actors. So it depends on the individual actor and how many days they're going to be on set. We had probably about 3 weeks of rehearsal, which is not common for indie films. I would fly out to Los Angeles from Texas, where we shot, and rehearse in their houses, in their backyards. Most of the cast was able to come to Texas at least a week before they started shooting for additional rehearsals. And it depends on the amount of screen experience that the actors had. So I don't do this with all actors, but for first-timers, and I have a history of working with first-timers, I can be incredibly specific. And we'll memorize every bit of blocking, every line of dialogue, and just rehearse it again and again until they don't have to think about anything. They're not worried about hitting their mark. They're not worried about their lines. And with certain cases, this could sort of result in a dry or robotic kind of rote performance. But what I do after we learn everything, and they're not nervous about the shooting experience, is that as I step back and I ask them to think about how the script and the scene can relate to their own lives. And I don't try and get inside their head. I choose cast who are intelligent and sensitive, and I let them do a lot of the work of getting to that emotional place. So I step back at one point, just prior to getting on set, and let them bring their own emotion and experiences there. And it's amazing. You turn what could have been a dry, robotic performance into something incredibly naturalistic. And it's almost magical watching it happen every time.
Yeah, I think naturalistic really is the descriptor for the performances in the film. And of course, that's enhanced by the setting and the action being so much of it exterior, maybe 90% of the film shot outdoors, which is unusual for a film with this scale to kind of risk all of that with the elements, but it works beautifully. I'm going to shift a little bit so I got a little bit better angle on you guys. Tishaun, it must have been a huge honor to receive the Special Jury Award for acting at the South by Southwest Film Festival. I don't know if y'all knew that, but they made up an award especially for him. What was that experience like?
It was an enormous honor. I had heard a lot about South by Southwest while we were shooting The Retrieval, and so I checked it out after we finished taping, and my first exposure to South by Southwest was Tiny Furniture by Lena Dunham. And when I said, this is what happens in this city, these are the films they're showing, I have to be a part of this. And I never knew that 2 years later that I would be sitting in the audience watching a film that I'm in on the screen there.
Right. And I mean, the role of Nate is so pivotal to the entire arc of the narrative. How did you go about preparing for that role? It's probably the most complex and emotionally guarded in the entire film, so it needs to have depth without revealing too much depth. What was your approach to that?
Incidentally, I was doing theater in 2009 at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and during my downtime, I went to their library and I went to the African American Interest section. And I was led to W.E.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folk, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Georgia Lynch Law, and I read these novels, these truths, these stories of the atrocities that took place in this nation. And I took another trip to a different bookstore, and I was looking around at the books in there, and there was one table, and it had $1. So all the books there were $1, and I'm looking and searching and seeing what could I get for $1, and there is the Confessions of Nat Turner.
Okay.
Nat Turner, are you familiar with who Nat Turner is? So I thought it was kind of crazy that here I am playing Nate, and here is the book for $1 of the Confessions of Nat Turner. So it was all preparation from reading, the history of this nation, looking at images of African American men at the time and how they, sat. They were very stoic. They didn't smile, and that's one thing that Chris reminded me of. It was like, there's no smiling, and we had a lot of rehearsal, which was, and it's a good thing. I come from the theater. Rehearsal is extraordinarily important. So that it became a part of the essence of who I was, that I could actually live and breathe the character. And I asked my ancestors to guide me through the process so that I made the correct choices so that he wouldn't seem like a caricature, but a real life of someone that existed in this country at that time.
People may sense that sort of taciturn, reserved demeanor kind of goes counter to your natural personality.
That would be a correct assumption.
How did you fight the urge?
Having a great director. Yeah, Chris is a brilliant director. I tell everyone he was my director, he was my acting coach, and he was my voice and speech coach, all in one.
What did you feel overall he contributed specifically to your performance, if you could pull one thread out?
One thing that I'm extraordinarily excited about, that Chris and I merged our theories on Nate, was the language. Mm-hmm. I saw it there. It was evident in the writing. Right. And I always felt that when I performed characters, because I went to UCLA for grad school, and Judith Moreland and Paul Wig are our voice and speech instructors there. And it was 3 years of enunciation and pronunciation and diction. So this went against everything that I had been trained to do. Sure. And I felt for a performance on film, I had to have a language that would be, it would resemble the sound of the character. So I use, I come from Shreveport, Louisiana. So I remember what my grandmother sounds like and what my family members sound like. So Chris and I crafted a sound for Nate that would be correct at that time, because a lot of the people, African Americans at the time, especially in Louisiana, they were bilingual. They spoke both French and English. And if you look at some of the depictions of African Americans, you hear the, vestigial sound of what that thought of the sound was because of the way it was written by the creators. But if people were speaking French, they didn't all sound that way. They had to have an accent or a sound. So it was a combination of the different sounds of the region and influence of the culture.
Right, yeah, I think that comes through. Keston, when you were auditioning for the role of Marcus, you must have been pretty clear that this was perhaps not the most likable character in the film, but pivotal nonetheless. How did you approach that part to try to understand and humanize Marcus's motivations for falling in with the bounty hunters?
I play a lot of bad guys. I just do. So I think anytime you're playing a bad guy, you just try to make them human. And Chris was kind of, he really he did, obviously he, and I didn't either, but he really didn't want this like one-dimensional thing. And we looked for specific moments where I could connect to Will, and it was showing that we were trying to not necessarily show the audience, but we were trying to create a relationship where it's different than the father relationship that they have, but it's one that's saying, this is a tough world, grow up. Right. You got to be tough in this world if you're going to survive. Mm-hmm. And that's the relationship that we have. So it was kind of finding that.
One of the beauties of Chris's script is that it's so spare. And as actors, I wonder whether that was a challenge for you to try to dig into the backstory that isn't explained through a whole lot of exposition. How did you try to find the root of that character and why he was doing what he was doing in this particular moment?
Right. I mean, I did some backstory stuff as far as like, you know, at what point did we leave our, you know, at what point did the Master's farm burn down? You know, at what point did Marcus have to take on the role of kind of protector and of Will, and why? So that's the kind of stuff that I did as far as connecting to the character. For me, it was very important. It was very important to find that socioeconomical level where you have power, but not enough.
Right.
And you're being, you know, you were just released, you're not quite a slave, but, you know, and so I think that I kind of used that to lord over Will, because you have just enough power, but not enough. And I see that in real life, you know.
Sure.
You get that mean manager because they're not quite the head.
Right.
So, you know, that's kind of
A little bit of power corrupts, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And did you find as you dug into this character and got into the rehearsals with Ashton that you began to kind of develop a familial relationship in terms of how you thought about his character and his performance?
Yes, Ashton and I, as people, we connected immediately within rehearsals. So it was kind of, it was kind of easy to have that relationship. But then, you know, in the film, it's kind of a different relationship. So I had to kind of distance myself from him while we were shooting because we hang out,
Right.
you know, in real life. So.
Well, there's a polarity there between the family member who's distant from his kin and the unrelated man who becomes kin. So that polarity exists between those two characters. How did you try to draw that out in the script, Chris?
Well, I mean, as far as the Marcus character, I had to, and this is something we've discussed, I had to keep him familial. I had to keep him from being this completely flat character, because I see myself in all the characters. I see myself in Burrell and Nate and Will and Marcus, everyone. And so we had these moments where, and sometimes it would just come up in rehearsal. You know, Marcus, Keston would say, maybe if I just gently touched his head here.
Mm-hmm.
But you couldn't tell if the touch was a power move or if it was sort of a gentle, you know, kind moment.
Right.
With Nate, it's more of that classic story of the standoffish, grumpy older man who comes around at the kid. But I didn't want it to feel like that thing that we've seen a million times, and I hope it didn't come across like that. And even in those gentle moments, I wanted to make sure that there was that sternness, and I tried to keep the historical perspective that he was talking about in mind, and that people did not express themselves the way we do today. Love was not expressed so openly. People were not so explicit, and so that's something that we discussed and something we made sure came across on screen.
Did you find in the rehearsal process that most of your adjustments had to do with gestures and blocking, or were you making changes to dialogue and to some extent with the actors' contributions, or did you stick pretty much to script?
We pretty much stuck with the script for the most part, right, guys? I mean, I would say it was more about the sounds of the language, the way that we would always say it's clipped. Yeah. Right? So he has a very sort of sing-songy, sort of beautiful way of speaking, and I wanted Nate to be very sort of terse and sharp and clipped, and so we would always discuss that. Sometimes right before a take, we would we look at each other and say clipped, right? and we would, and so we'd find it that way.
Keeping that manner of speech in mind during the performance.
Right.
Yeah.
My favorite thing that you say is smaller, smaller, a little less, little less, just slightly
Less is
ever
more.
so slightly less.
Well, speaking of Burrell Bill, as one of the film's principal antagonists, he kind of stands somewhat apart from the other main characters. How did you envision his role more from a narrative point of view as far as advancing the action and defining the stakes? Because from a template point of view, he essentially gives the heroes, the anti-heroes, their mission. How does, and then the story circles back to him again. So there's this big gap where he exists almost as more of a figure than, an actual presence in the scenes.
It's interesting that you say a figure because I saw him as God / the devil. I saw him as the center of the storm. And I hate / love the moment in the film where you're really getting into their relationship and it feels like a family and you feel this universal human yearning, let this be okay, and then here comes Burrell and his gang reminding you that it's not okay and it never will be.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of what Keston said. Do you play a lot of antagonists, a lot of bad guys?
I
Because
do.
some of those scenes were chilling. Chilling.
But there is something, you learn something from every director. What I learned from Chris Eska is how to be quiet and still in a frame. I thought I knew how to be quiet and still in a frame, but he wanted me quieter and stiller, almost to the point of not breathing. And there's a beauty in the sparsity of the language that Chris writes. And it was wonderful, beautiful, and almost spiritual to stand there without moving, hardly breathing, and to let these words find their own rhythm without any histrionics from me as an actor. So I tried to do very little.
Right, and it seems like that spare dialogue in some scenes translates to the performance. I mean, you were doing more with your eyes and your eyebrows and, a twitch of your cheek than any amount of ranting and raving would have contributed to the scene.
Well, I'm not a great actor, but I've always believed that there's a weird alchemy that happens if you live with the words of a script long enough. They will tell you how they want to be spoken. If you will live with them long enough, that's not a week before, a day before. It's just letting them be in your spirit. And eventually, they will tell you how they want to be spoken. And then if they tell you wrong, the director will correct you.
Y'all can speak for yourselves, but did you individually spend a lot of time with your script before you got to rehearsal? Had you heard that Chris was real big on rehearsal and that you knew what to expect, or?
I think the rehearsals started in the year, not a year before, but the year we shot in February, and I think we started rehearsing in December. So I think I had a good 4 months with the script, just proving through, reading it over and connecting that to just pictures, and I like imagery, and so I like to look back at those pictures of things that happen to these people. So and just finding this is where this is where Marcus shows Will that this is what we do to survive. The first moment in the film, put my hand on his head, and I say that's money, that's what we need to survive. So the words I think were there, and we had time. Which you don't get, which was a luxury. The rehearsals were a luxury.
Anybody else have similar methods or invest a similar process pre-rehearsal as these guys did in terms of your approach to just getting to the pre-production?
Well, it was really helpful. Chris actually would come to my house and we would go over the script when he was in town and just think about the story of the character and what her motivation was, and this relationship with Rachel and Nate, and how that just the turmoil they had both been through. And then being on set was really easy to get in character and prepare because there was still cotton growing out there. So, I held on to this cotton ball the entire time on set that day. And just it's how can you not transport back into that time and think about what your ancestors have gone through. And that was just my personal process. It was really easy.
Alfonso?
I mentioned before I didn't get the rehearsals, although I think we did read through it one time when you were at my house because he brought the he was my wardrober, and what really did it for me was really the wardrobe. It's like once you put the clothes on, you're like in it, you know. And then I had the blessing of finding out some things about my family, and that there was a love story between a master and my great grandmother, which was interesting. They ended up living together in Mississippi. And I kind of drew on those kinds of storylines of what it must have been like, and also I was about to go through a divorce, and so that was in that process too. So when I came to just dealing with the character, you know, I just kind of dealt with the reality of dealing with a woman, you know, and we got that one scene, Tishaun and I, where we got to connect as men, you know, and really kind of relate to the humanity. And I think that's what I liked about the whole script, is it was a very human script. You know, it wasn't about slave or master or anything else. It was just a lot of humanity there. Good humanity, bad humanity, mostly bad. And I drew on that personally. And after that, it was just slow down, so because I'm a fast talker, and to find a way to get the words out. You know, and when I talk slow, my slow talking is your normal. And so I had to really, really work on that. And I think I didn't get quite the clip. I didn't get that thing, but I did get slowed down one time.
Anybody else discover aspects of their family history or their ancestral towns or states as part of your preparation process?
I would say I am originally from South Carolina,
Yeah.
and I also have mixed race history in my own family, and so this resonated with me quite a bit. I could easily see my family past in a lot of the characters.
Right. Christine, coming back to the character of Rachel, she plays a somewhat smaller role in the film, but one of the most pivotal pieces. Since you knew there wasn't a lot of screen time for you going into this, how did you prepare your scenes so that they would really ensure that your performance would resonate at the end when we came back to those final scenes?
Well, there is a bit of pressure that comes with the way the script is written and talking about Rachel time and time again, and you're like, well, who is this woman? You know? But all I just thought about was this relationship and this love between these characters, and how he meant to do better, but something happened and he just didn't make it back, and I didn't know. I just thought about just my personal life. I'm sure everyone can relate about that love and the stuff that happens, and that's sometimes out of your control. And Chris, great director, and really helped me just develop her. And I just wanted to just bring her humanity, bring her that weir of the world that it got on her.
Right.
But still, that love is still there, no matter what kind of front she puts up.
Right. Well, and you also had the challenge of carrying the principal, really the only principal female role in the film. How did you see Rachel's centrality to the whole narrative compressed into such a short amount of screen time?
Oh, well, I just kept remembering that I felt like it helped Nate. No matter, even though he didn't know when we were going to reconnect, I didn't know if we would ever reconnect. I just remember that this character, she probably helped him move on, to live each day, and that's that love that never dies, that person you never forget about.
I see.
Yeah, and I just...
High school.
Yeah.
Not to get personal
Something
or
like right.
anything. No, we'll stop right there.
But I will say it was an honor to play that role.
Yeah, it's so central and so beautifully executed. It's a wonderful, wonderful performance. Alfonso, though, you had the only single scene of any character in the movie, right? It's the only scene where one character appears only once. So you really had to make that count.
Damn you, Chris.
Well, I don't know what got cut, but I'm just saying. And it's extremely evocative how it goes from, it swings between extremes. And I wonder how you imagine this character's backstory and the way it brought that particular moment of both confrontation and reconciliation in 3.5 minutes of screen time.
Well, I read it a few times, And I'm not going to have any clever answers here. I read it a few times, and I just saw this guy as a guy who was just trying to hold his own, because he still got to be a slave, and that's how he was dealing with his world. He's one of the few guys who's able to be with his wife. And I'm stepping into another role, to role of another man. So you see that one little moment where I get to kind of, well, awesome, man. Now, and it's kind of like that. It's just trying to make that moment work, for this guy, that he's a man. He's a man, and he's, you see that little turn. You see the turn when he goes into, I don't know what she's thinking about all the time. And if you've ever been in a relationship, you know what that's all about. Where everything is fine, and then you stop for a moment. It's like, wait, what did you tell me to get again? And you just and you always trying to remind yourself you're a man. And I think that was how that's how I had to approach the character. He's like, get these damn shoes out of here.
So again, creating a little bit of polarity with Rachel's character, where that there was some distinction, even though they shared a life. There was a very distinct point of view that each of those characters had about the life that they shared.
Absolutely. I mean, you could see right away they were all three different kinds of people. I can imagine Nate's character being a lot more, woman, kind of holding it down a little bit, whereas my character is more like, all right.
Well, and again, the non-dialogue part of the performance, I mean, it's all scripted, the entire scene, but it's the body language and the expressions and the gestures that are going on that give us the foundation of what that character is really thinking and not saying.
Yeah.
But Chris, this comes back to the script and crafting such a beautifully spare and evocative screenplay, and particularly the dialogue. What was it in terms of your focus and even your practice that enabled you to hone that script so that it was lean but extremely evocative at the same time?
Well, my education involved a lot of world cinema from the 1950s, 1960s, and my previous two features were both in foreign languages. Mm-hmm. And I've always sort of felt that language is not what cinema does best. In some ways, I'll leave that to radio and television. And so I feel like the emotion can come through much better through just sort of a subtle glance, body language, the editing, the music, the montage. And yeah, so, I mean, it reminds me of something I learned in film school. I guess Polanski's first feature is called Knife in the Water, and he and his screenwriting partner, they would take every single sentence in the film. If it was a 5-word sentence, they would find a way to make it 4 words. Mm-hmm. And they would just keep going through and cutting it back just to the essence of the emotion they were trying to get across. And I've always found that helpful.
Did you find that you were doing that with the action as well? Because one of the things that people notice is how deeply Chris, who also edited the film, cuts into those scenes. To some extent, it's not the cinematic language of comedy, but it does some of the things that comedies do in terms of editing. We're not wasting any time going from here to there. We're here and then we're there. So was that a gradual process in terms of winnowing down the length of some of those scenes?
No, most of the scenes were written as shot. We cut one entire scene, but for the most part, it's just a good technique in writing to come into a scene, halfway through, or leave the scene before it's completely done, and just sort of let the audience fill in the blanks, both in terms of getting from point A to point B, but also just sometimes a character will ask another character a question, and a lot of times I don't have the other character answer. I
Right.
just let the silence hang there and let
Right.
the audience think about it and maybe give their own answer.
Kind of come in late, get out early, and let the subtext speak for itself. Now I know some of you all have already commented on the script and the dialogue, but does anybody else want to say anything about that as far as your professional experience with writer-directors who are writing and directing their own material, how this particular production was unique or different for you in terms of the actual script material?
I was going to add, when we were speaking about the script, I approached it like Shakespeare because I could tell in the writing that there was a meter to Nate's language, and I wanted to make sure that that was there so that it matched the character. So I went through my script like I do with Shakespeare, and I scanned it. So I would find the things that needed, the words that needed emphasis, or, when you do the stress-unstress thing with the language, I did that with the script. So I pretty much broke it down like it was a chemistry set.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely say there was a definite rhythm to the script, and I noticed it more in ADR when, having to go back and redo it, and it was, as a singer, I was like, oh, I'm just singing. It's like, Lord, you showing, and it was just, and I was like, wow, there's a really nice rhythm to this. So that was nice to explore.
Great. Well, we'll see if we come back to that. We're going to get to a couple of audience questions, and you all being a very practical group, we'll start with a craft question. What was it that distinguished the cast, in your opinion, Chris, in their auditions?
Well, it's not that I have these extensive rehearsals, and that's that. I actually have extensive casting process, and I generally put the actors through their paces right there. The most important thing for me, and maybe you guys have seen this in auditions, is I have them do it. I then have them try and do it the way that I envision it. And then regardless, I try and have them do it a completely different way, just to make sure and to discover whether or not they can take direction. Mm-hmm. And then I'll go a step further and tweak it even more and see how they can sort of fine-tune these directions. Right. Because taking directions is the most important thing. I also like to spend a lot of time with the cast, if at all possible, chatting. If I don't get to meet with them outside of the audition room, but hopefully I can, and just sort of get a sense of them as people. I need to cast sort of these intelligent, sensitive people who are going to be able to take the words and go, because I don't want to try and micromanage everything. I know I definitely do a little bit of that, but I need them to bring their own.
Right. So kind of a follow-up to that, what are the things that you're mainly looking for when you're casting your roles? I guess that's a general question, not necessarily, obviously you had specific requirements for this film, but generally as a writer-director, what kind of responses are you looking for in auditions that are going to get you to latch on to a performance?
It's so hard to describe, that sort of that special quality, that charisma that comes across, and you can't always even see it in person. Sometimes you have to get back to the footage of the audition, and then it comes out. You see that twinkle in their eye, that menacing look that isn't always there. Somebody like Bill is so incredibly friendly, just a complete gentleman. We'll be chatting with you during the audition, and I need to distance myself from that and have that distance, have that space, and review it later. Also, it's not interesting, but they have to look right together. Sometimes you just have to line up all the photos of your cast and make sure that they feel like they could be a family, or that this person would be afraid of that person. Right. Things as simple as that.
So that they have to fit together in terms of their lineup. Yeah.
I got to say something to that one.
Sure.
There. And that is, I've been sitting here thinking about the casting for days, as a matter of fact, and just thinking how wonderfully chocolatey the main characters are in this film, which defies the Hollywood okey doke of let's just populate everything with somebody that's acceptable to everybody else. This is brave casting, and I personally really appreciated that.
Well, and considering how restrained the cinematography is, I think that was very well achieved because you didn't have a whole lot of excess lighting and setups to work with in all those exterior locations. Speaking of which, somebody would like to know, how far apart were all of those locations? And did you shoot on multiple locations, some distance apart, or were they kind of grouped together?
Sure, about 3/4 of the film was shot in South Texas, near my hometown of Gonzales. And Texas is huge, so we also went about 5 or 6 hours to northeast Texas for the pine forest and some of the swamp. But we do the standard shooting that you'd find in any film. The swamp that you saw there was actually 3 different locations pushed together. The beautiful palmettos within walking distance of my childhood home, and then the place where they're wading through the swamp was a good 5 or 6 hours away. And the other place was on a friend's ranch where they'd flooded a forest, and so all these dead trees were there in the Freedman's camp.
I wonder, for the actors, considering that 90% of this film is shot exterior on location without a huge crew to maybe watch your every move around the actual shooting location, what were some of the unexpected challenges that you might have run into in terms of dealing with the terrain or weather or insects or what have you? It's not a closed set, so you weren't able to call somebody and ask them to, change the climate control.
This was the coldest winter on record in the the last 20-something years in Texas. We had a 13-degree day where the day where we're walking over and we see the camp, the Union camp. That was 13 degrees. Me and Ashton were just like freezing. At one point, I think Ashton quit the film. It's just like, I gotta go in the van and talk to him. Oh, one more take, come on. But no, I mean, between heaters and hand warmers, but that was a huge obstacle. I mean, it was cold every day. But then there was days where we were at the shack where it was very hot. So the weather played a part, but I think the environment actually added to for me, because phone basically wasn't working anyway. So leave it at home. You know what I mean? You're in that environment. You're I think about the scene where we're eating, and I don't know. We can talk about how to do that or silverware or any of that. You do what you're gonna do. You're out there, and props gives you your stuff, and it's just you're in that environment, and you're there, and it helps. It just helps. That's.
Did other people find the setting and the climate conditions actually affecting their performance and their concept of the character they were playing, Tishaun?
Absolutely. I think that it set the mood for all of the scenes. And it was also very fun, I mean, it was very cold. I remember the day that I was shoveling, it was so cold, my hands had gotten like this, and these were the hands that were shoveling. That's how cold it was. But it was I'm from Shreveport, Louisiana, again, I'm going to say, and I always had these ideas of wanting to walk through the swamp water in my city. Who thinks of walking through swamp water? But I wanted to do it. Right. And I thought, when I read the script, I was like, oh my God, I get to walk through swamp water? This is great. So we got on set, and the water was freezing. You could not put any part of your body in it. So when I fell, I was not trying to fall, but I ended up falling anyway. And I walked through the rest of it, but we had to get out and wrap my body up because it was so cold. And we had asked, the crew, I was like, Ashton and I were like, you guys have to put your hands in this water. If we're doing it, this is a team and a family thing. Everybody
they have their parkas and gloves.
Yeah. And no one did it. Except for Jason Whaling, our producer.
There was actually, you couldn't see it, but there was actually ice on the top of that swamp.
But it was fun.
Partially frozen.
Bill, you have a number of scenes. Well, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one thing about exterior locations. I have worked with horses a lot, playing horsebound antagonists, and movie horses and animal wranglers do not get enough credit, particularly the movie horse. If you have a good movie horse, you don't have much time with the horse beforehand. He can make you look like you know what you're doing. Right. We went out to a rodeo ring to rehearse this little dance with the torches, the guns, and there's no way I could have gotten that in time. My horse was named Scamp. He was Mel Gibson's horse in The Patriot. He worked in Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood. He was a great movie horse. He passed away last year. And so watching him on screen, the horse wrangler told me this was going to be very emotional to watch him. Scamp was a character too. When you ride a movie horse, they are as much a part of your character as you are because you don't know what the hell you're doing. And if a horse knows if you know what you're doing, and if a horse is like a woman, if they're very kind, they will not let you know that they know you don't know what you're doing.
So it sounds like you found the horse contributing to your performance as well.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't have done it without Scamp.
Christine, any thoughts?
Just being there in the shacks that were recreated and getting a tour from the gentleman who ran the place. Did he run that place? The man who was out there, and just seeing. I don't know. It just takes you back instantly. Right. I mean, there were horses and pigs and turkeys, and I mean, it was just. I mean, you were transported, like Keston said. No phone, just And I was there on one of Chris said the warmest day that they had, so it wasn't too bad for me. Right.
Well, there's one other question for the audience here, and I guess it's kind of a writer-director question, but maybe it's something that you all have envisioned in terms of the story. But this questioner wonders, could there be an alternate ending where Nate survives?
No.
No. Absolutely not.
Absolutely not, but we shot it. But
you're not going to leave us there, are you?
I intentionally kind of half-assed it so that we could never use it.
So did I.
Gag reel.
But yeah, no, I'll tell you. When I was originally shopping the project around and looking for investors, the original script ended with Nate being shot. He falls and disappears into the grass. And then we have the close-up of the boy just completely distraught. Right. And then we cut to black, and that's that. And then the idea with that was, just, punch the audience in the stomach and turn on the lights and let them think about it, And one of my eventual executive producers read it, and she called me. She said, "Chris, if you shoot this film, I will tell all my friends I know to never, ever watch any movie you ever direct." And I wanted it to be bittersweet, and it wasn't even a compromise. To me, to add this little ray of hope made the film better. What the audience hopefully wants is for this boy to have family, and they want him to have a father figure. But what I try to do is give the audience what they want in a way that they don't expect it. And so we take away the father figure and we give them a mother figure. And I think it's the best ending of all possibles.
Absolutely, I think it worked so well, don't you all? It just that last moment of resonance, and that's what I was meaning about your performance. You had to set that up in your first scene and come back to that. You knew it was coming, but we didn't know it was coming. Any last couple questions? We might have time for one or two out in the audience.
I wanted to ask all of you, and I think you kind of touched on it already. Is there a memorable or precious moment, experience that you can take away from this film in particular, whether it's something that happened on set with another actor, happened off-set, a relationship that may have bonded with any of you?
I'm just going to repeat the question so the rest of the room can hear it. The gentleman wonders whether the cast members had any special moments or connections with the other members of the cast and the crew on set that they were able to take away with them from the film. And it sounds like some of y'all knew each other before getting there. So did it make it better? No.
I can say one thing, and it really goes back to the ancestry thing. This was my first time being on a film that that had historical significance, and then I got to work inside the shack. I will not forget the inside of the shack. That's how many of my ancestors had to live. Now not to draw on that and draw that out, but it makes me remember, how could I have it today, And it also was a great experience for me as an actor, to experience something that really affects how I deliver a character.
Okay, we've got time for about two more, so I'm going to jump around the room all the way in the back in the red. Yes, ma'am. Shout it out. Don't hold back.
This is a selfish question. I wanted to know about the casting process. I didn't
I heard you. Did everybody else hear her? Okay. Very well enunciated.
I actually saw this project in 2009 in Backstage West, and it had an address, send a headshot. So I sent Chris a headshot. Didn't hear anything. In 2010, I saw the project again in Backstage West, and I was like, okay. Chris doesn't remember getting my headshot, so I guess. But no, and then I got an audition. Yeah.
I saw it on Actors Access. Self-submit. So for all of you out there waiting on your agent, self-submit.
Self-submit.
Okay, another question. In the middle.
I don't know if you can share what your budget was personally. I don't know if that's inappropriate to ask. But
You notice I didn't ask. That's Chris's call.
Yeah, sorry, because we are still fielding offers from distributors, we can't discuss that.
They're contractual.
But
Is there an acting question?
Is there an acting question?
SAG-AFTRA?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
I just want to say that for Blacks and White, this is an outstanding movie. It is so moving and it is so beautiful to see such a magnificent movie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chris, this question is for you. Tremendous cinematography in the movie, and I was just wondering how, truly an art-looking piece. I was just wondering how you discovered or found your director of photography and how you worked with him.
The question is about the cinematography, which I'm sure everybody noticed is just outstanding, both in terms of the quality of the image and the movement of the camera. And question is, how did Chris find and work with this particular DP?
So the director of photography is Yasu Tanida, and he's actually shot all 3 of my last films. He was born in Japan, but grew up in Orange County. And when I was a UCLA thesis student, I was going over to Tokyo to shoot a film, and I was looking for cast and crew here to take over with me for just a bare basics. And he said he knew Japanese, and so we decided to go over there and shoot this film on the trains and streets of Tokyo. He didn't know Japanese at all, but it's okay because the images were just beautiful, and we developed that shorthand so that by the time we shot my first feature, August evening, we didn't have to discuss it. And with this film, I just let him go.
I think we can take one more question about acting. Acting question. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes, please.
I just want to say, first of all, amazing film. One was phenomenal, the whole cast. And I wanted to ask, since it's the youngin, with Will, how he came about to be in the project. And I just wanted to also say, with the end, I felt that he kept Nate's promise to give the money to Rachel. That's what moved me so much with seeing that. So, I love that.
Sure. Yeah, we ended up finding him through very normal channels. His agent had submitted him, and he came to at least 2 callbacks. But I saw probably 400 or 500 people for this role, including every school within a couple hundred miles of where I live in Texas. Just going through, talking to the principals, going through yearbooks, encouraging the parents to bring them out, and we ended up going with, LA is where the talent is, so we had to come out here and.
There's talent in Texas, too. That's where I live.
Yes.
Houston,
but we went
Texas.
to UCLA.
we both went to UCLA, and I never bumped into Chris there. We discussed it when he was offering me the role at lunch, and I was like, whoa, this is serendipitous. That was my word.
I think we'll end on that word.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody,
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let's